One of the best things that games like The Outer Worlds give you is a ton of freedom. But how much freedom does it really offer? Does it allow you to steal whatever you want and get through with it? Today, we will let our naughtier side come out when we try to answer the question, can you beat The Outer Worlds with only stolen items? When I came up with this challenge, I wasn't super precise as to how I wanted to approach this. The only rules I set for myself were this: I can only use items that are marked as being owned by someone, and only use items that I pickpocketed from someone. Now, experienced Outer Worlds players may already be developing some twists in their knickers, because they know very precisely that you actually have to use the weapon that guard Pelham gives you at the beginning of the game in order to escape the cave. Of course, that one doesn't count as stolen, but I'm sure we can all agree that it wouldn't be unreasonable to just ignore him and actually start the challenge as soon as we've destroyed the barrels. For what it's worth, I did my best to try and see whether I could actually pickpocket them off of him before he gives them to me, but sadly the game doesn't let me anywhere near him without starting our conversation. Unfortunately for us, The Outer Worlds also doesn't allow us to fight with our fists, which means I absolutely had to hit the barrels with one of his weapons to get started. Before leaving, I did pickpocket my way into Pelham's inventory to steal his armor, because I didn't want to use the hibernation suit that I got at the beginning. Then I got rid of everything that I could, which only left me with the stolen armor and the sentry saber that I was gifted. Even though I made my character as skilled as possible in the art of stealthing, and even made him look like a real dirtbag, I couldn't for the life of me manage to steal from these marauders. Therefore, I was forced to just run away from them because I obviously wasn't allowed to use the weapon that I had with me. I quickly made my way to Edgewater while avoiding any other enemies, and stole a helmet from one of the guards to complete my outfit. Thankfully for me, this building just outside the town was occupied by some shovels and spades, which meant that I was now actually capable of dealing damage to people, even if it wasn't a lot. There wasn't that much for me to do around town, since doing most missions wasn't very useful to me due to the fact that I couldn't accept their rewards. I went to talk to Reed Thompson, but not before selling some of my stolen goods. This challenge does not really give me the option to actually buy any items with this money, but I like the thought of at least making some quick bucks through my illicit activities, just in case I did need it for something later down the line. I was continuing to steal my way around the place when I discovered some very nice weapons on Constable Reyes, which I of course immediately stuck between my greasy hands. On account of the mayor, I was tasked to go to the geothermal plant to help him out with crippling the deserters that left his town. However, knowing exactly why I was really here, I swaggered down towards Edgewater's power regulator and tried to snatch it before realizing that I couldn't do that until I completed the mission. Outside the city walls, I tried my hands at some sneaky melee combat, which didn't end very well for me. As a result, I decided to instead avoid conflict from that point onwards if I could help it. When I reached the botanical lab where the deserters were holed up, I was disappointed to discover that they didn't have very good loot for me to steal. Around this point I also got my first level up, and whenever I did, I usually put my points into one of the stealth skills. The perks weren't that interesting to me, so I just chose whichever I liked the most at any particular moment. Inside the geothermal plant, I made sure to fight against these robots as little as possible. I'm proud to say that I made it through almost the entire building without alerting them. I then diverted all the power towards Edgewater, which left the deserters without any electricity. Adelaide was certainly not pleased about that, yet for some reason she admitted to me that she was using human bodies in order to fertilize the area. And for this trustful display of honesty, I blew her head off with a shotgun. Needless to say, her followers were not happy whatsoever about this, and drove me out of the community with pitchforks and torches. I also really felt the need to rob Mr. Thompson, but these bodyguards standing around him sadly made it pretty impossible for me. By the way, I passed on Parvati earlier because I just couldn't see her aligning herself with a good-for-nothing pickpocket, whose only goal in life is to get by with as few legal business transactions as possible. After leaving Edgewater for good, I took Hawthorne's ship and installed the power regulator that I took from the deserters. Now, these types of quest items formalized a very controversial aspect of this challenge. This regulator didn't technically count as being stolen, At least not in the sense that I didn't take it out of someone's inventory, and it also wasn't marked as a stolen item when I took it. In fact, Adelaide and her crew didn't even become hostile when I relieved them of it. They only did when I popped her like a watermelon. Of course, I decided to try my best to obtain quest items by literally pickpocketing them out of their living owner's inventory if possible. Up until this point, the only non-stolen items that I had to use or couldn't get rid of were the sentry saber from the very beginning, the power regulator, a captain's ID card given to me by Ada, and the unreliable itself. With me and my new ship taking off from the planet of Terra 2, Phineas tasked me with getting a nav key to Stellar Bay from a woman called Gladys on the Groundbreaker. Now, as it turns out, she simply offers to sell it to me for 10,000 bits, which, as my lawyer would surely point out, I'm not allowed to do. As a result, Gladys tried to sabotage me by smuggling a piece of candy into my inventory when I wasn't looking. You best believe that I returned this devilish thing as soon as physically possible. My plan was to figure out whether or not I could pickpocket the nav key from her body or from the safe in her room. There were 2 guards standing behind her, so the chances of me getting caught were pretty high, but my character wasn't strong enough to take on all of these people at once. I then discovered that Gladys did not carry that nav key on her body, so the safe seemed to be the only option. Shockingly, not even that held the nav key that I needed. Dumbfounded as I was, I at least took this official seal of the Halcyon Holdings board with me. Honestly, at that point in time, I had no idea what use this object served, but it looked important, which is why I decided to take it with me. With the nav key to Stellar Bay literally being unstealable, I went back to the Unreliable. My ship was impounded by Udom Bedford, who would later become a very important person for this run, although I hadn't yet realized it at that point. You see, if you offer to give up the location of Phineas, Udom actually gives you a nav key to Byzantium, which is where we need to go after Stellar Bay. This is where that official seal that I stole from Gladys comes in handy, because we need to give it to Udom in order to be allowed to go there. The only reason why I didn't go through with it was because he would give me the nav key. I couldn't accept that, because I wanted to steal it. Now, with these guys standing behind him at all times, pickpocketing him would have been easier said than done anyways. But shockingly, the game doesn't even give you the option of looking into Udom's inventory in the first place. Very disappointed, I searched around the building in the hopes of finding the nav key somewhere, and I even killed him to see if I could get it that way, but this nav key was also unstealable. Anyways, I didn't worry too much about it and instead landed in Cascadia, which the game doesn't encourage you to do, but it was my only way towards Stellar Bay. On my way off the Groundbreaker, I had also picked up Felix because he seemed like the kind of person to vibe with a lifelong thief like me. Naturally, I couldn't leave him in the equipment that he already had with him because it wasn't stolen. At least I think it wasn't. I ended up giving him some of the few weapons that I had and let him wear the only piece of armor that I owned, leaving me almost completely naked. Cascadia was quite horrible. Fighting enemies as little as sprats would have had deadly consequences for me. And there wasn't anything for me to loot because the entire town had been abandoned by people, which meant that no one owned these things anymore. I can't steal something that nobody owns. The path to Stellar Bay was a long one, and it didn't go very well for Felix, who spent most of our trip getting killed and being dead. Eventually I did reach the city and proceeded to do some side missions in order to increase my levels a bit. Not that it needs to be said, but I also stole a bunch of stuff. I took this very nice revolver from Velma and looted all of her belongings, including some great armor and the signed tossball poster that I gave to Grim for some more experience. I did make it up to her by also stealing Caleb's entire savings, which forced him to get back to work for her. Aside from stealing as much as I could, I also had to find and talk to the information broker. Nyoka helped me out by sharing his location with me, but even though she was very stubborn about it, I didn't let her join my crew. I'm not entirely sure why, but part of me felt that I was cheating by having someone accompany me, even if all of the weapons and armors were replaced by stolen ones. As a result of that, I also ended up sending Felix back to the ship a bit later into my adventures on the planet of Monarch, and let him sit on the sidelines for the entire rest of the game. Reaching the broker proved to be a fairly simple affair. After I realized that my fighting abilities weren't enough to take on all of these marauders, I decided to sneak around and kill them without getting my hands dirty by using a computer terminal to do the job. Hiram, aka the broker, then sent me to stop the broadcasts of Stellar Bay and Ember Heights so that he could receive outerworldly transmissions instead. What sounded so easy in Hiram's voice ended up being nothing short of a nightmare for me. In order to get Sanjar and Graham to stop broadcasting, I had to complete 2 missions for each of their respective factions. Among the things I would have had to do for them was obtaining a Bolt 52 cartridge for Sanjar and some printing press rolls for Graham. Neither of these items can be stolen, they are just given to you by 2 individual NPCs as a result of saving their lives. I did literally try to steal the printing rolls off of Carlotta, but just like with Udom, the game didn't even let me pickpocket her. I didn't try the same thing with Huxley because I struggled to even get the door open that she was stuck behind, and I couldn't pick up the key to open it because it wouldn't have counted as a stolen item. Well, you might want to get comfortable in there, Huxley. Now, I had to get this information one way or another, so it seemed like the only way to get it was by killing Sanjar and Graham and stopping their broadcasts that way. Well, I went and killed Hiram instead. I was curious what the game would do to make up for his death, so I decided to give it a shot. It led me towards the broker's computer, where I was once again given the task of stopping the other 2 broadcasts. I crossed Sanjar off first, mainly because he was less armored than Graham and the area around him was more suitable for a quick escape. Taking down Graham, on the other hand, was a lot more difficult. I tried time and time again to kill him and get out of there before dying myself, but there were so many iconoclasts around at all times, plus I had to assassinate him on the 2nd floor of a building with only 1 exit. After trying to kill him for almost half an hour, I decided to go back and try a different route. With Graham giving me a lot more trouble than I had expected, I chose to go back to my guy Udom and try to get my hands on his Byzantium nav key after all. Yes, this thing was not stolen. However, I remembered that Phineas actually also gives you a Byzantium nav key after you deal with the troubles on Monarch. This means that there is no way to get to Byzantium without being given a nav key. I probably couldn't have stolen it off of Phineas, and I can't steal it off of Udom, so I guess I'm choosing the lesser evil in him, because at least I had to steal the official seal of the Halcyon board in order to receive it. If you know of a better way to handle this, let me know in the comments. Once I arrived there, I met Sophia Akande and took a detour straight to Minister Clark's home. Even though I was technically in the board's questline now, I still wanted to continue with the path that Phineas would have put me on, since that was the only one that I was personally familiar with. I first tried to pickpocket and then kill the guard in front of his house, but my weapons were so weak that he sliced me in half pretty damn quickly. I then decided to just run past him into the building, but it required you to either have the minister's estate key or a lockpicking skill of 100. Now, I'll be entirely honest with you here, I was a bit sloppy in my approach of getting in there. After some deliberation on this issue, I decided to go back to my ship and make use of the respecification machine in order to reset all of my stats and pump my skill points into lockpicking. Then, I lockpicked my way through the door in order to continue. As I'm writing this script, however, I've come to the realization that I never actually managed to look into the guard's inventory. According to the Outer Worlds wiki, the minister's estate key can actually be pickpocketed off of him, so that would have definitely been the smoother way to go about this. I moved into Minister Clark's home because I was hoping to get something that would help me continue the path of Phineas. But when I discovered that Clark doesn't even spawn until you get rid of Sanjar and Graham's broadcasts, my moral direction shifted a bit. I decided to give the board's questline a shot since Udom's nav key transported me to the top of the HHC building anyways. I started working for Sophia, who quickly gave me the task of planting a bug in Phineas's lab. This was very easy, but I couldn't look the man in the eyes anymore after this. As a reward for my exceptional work, Sophia asked me to stop the broadcasts on Monarch. I just couldn't get around killing Graham. I tried to figure out whether there was a different way to go about this, but all signs pointed towards me having to get rid of him the old-fashioned way. I landed back in Cascadia in an effort to find information about Graham betraying the Iconoclasts. That might have led to him being taken out by his own partner Zora, but I had no idea where to find it, or if I could have even found it this early into the Iconoclast questline anyways. In order to have a chance against the entire army that stood by Graham's side, I took another shot at the respecification machine. This cost me 1000 bits and allowed me to now throw everything into heavy weapons and defense. As soon as I had this set up, I was easily able to kill him and instantly got away. Now, with Stellar Bay and Ember Heights effectively having been wiped off the map, Sophia asked me to do the same with Edgewater. She sent some robots down to do the dirty work for me, and I didn't have to do much aside from sneaking into a building and activating them. After that, she sent me to the Hope, where I suffered heavily from not having been able to pick up the holographic shroud on my ship. This would have allowed me to just walk past the robot enemies here, but it wasn't marked as an owned item, so it was a total no-go. Before going in there, I used the respec machine one final time at a cost of 2000 bits to put all of my points into stealth. Interestingly, almost all loot inside the Hope was considered owned, which meant that this was a fine place for me to get some better equipment and more ammunition. Then I did what any responsible player would do. I skip jumped myself and the Hope along with all of its passengers into the sun. Now technically this does count as one of the endings of the game, but it would be a bit anticlimactic to end here, so I went back and actually skip jumped the ship to Tartarus where Sophia wanted it. The planet of Tartarus brought about the same problems as my time on the Hope, because the Hollow Shroud would have potentially also helped me out a ton in this area. Sneaking was my highest priority, and I did actually manage to kill an enemy here and there, only in the name of staying hidden of course. Still, there were some bigger sections that were very troublesome for me, and I had to really explore this area in order to find the paths with the least enemies and the most hiding places. For the final boss fight against Ram, I made sure that I had a good ace up my sleeve. You see, if you reach this point with a lockpick stat of 100 and a hack skill of 100, you can get into this terminal and completely eliminate him without even touching him. What I didn't know was that you needed to add at least one other ingredient to the mix. According to the Outer Worlds wiki, this can either be one of 3 passwords that you can find around the place, or a 100 skill in either engineering, science, or heavy weapons. I had none of these. But thankfully, my low intelligence stat that I went with at the very beginning offered me a dumb option that allowed me to take Ram down after all. Damn! One thing that all of these challenge runs have taught me so far is that planning ahead is super crucial, and I should definitely pay more attention to that in the future. Sadly, the end of this game is not very friendly towards my challenge here. This is because the big robot and Phineas, or Sophia if you chose the other route, have keycards that you need to take from their dead bodies. I spent some time trying to somehow pickpocket Ram, and I tried the same with Phineas, but neither of them allowed me to snoop around in their inventory, so this was the only way for me. After doing that, I saved Sophia and at the same time doomed the entire Halcyon colony. So, this result is kind of a funky one. Can you beat the Outer Worlds with only stolen items? Well, it kind of depends on what rules you set for yourself. If we exclude any quest related items, then yeah, you can. That being said, there were a number of items that I had to legitimately obtain in order to continue, with almost all of them being quest items. This was only my second ever playthrough, which is why there was a lot of things I didn't know about this game, so I hope you can forgive me for that. As an end note, I finally posted the full playthrough in the description so you can fact check me on whether or not I've actually cheated at any point, if you want that. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.